Hey there, friend. Hello, listener. Thank you very much for joining us today. Why don't you take a deep breath and check in, make sure everything's okay. Here, I'll even do it with you. Good to be with you right here in the moment. Let's do the show. Stand up. Yeah, I just thought that would be a fun, different way to start. Maybe I'll do more of those random cold openings just to catch you off guard. Hello and welcome to today's episode of Stand Up. I have an amazing guest, one of my favorite political analysts who is also a big favorite of our friend Bill Boyle, who's also a favorite political analyst of mine. So it's like when you see someone who's really tall and then someone even taller standing next to them and you think, well, those two guys must really get each other. That's how I feel about Bill Boyle and Brian Beutler, who know each other from their D.C. neighborhood, apparently. But anyway, Brian is now the founder of Off Message, which is a newsletter about politics, media, and culture without all the jargon or talking points, he says. And I agree. Of course, I love it. Such a big fan and now subscriber. He's formerly Crooked Media's editor-in-chief. He was a New Republic senior editor and worked at a bunch of other places as well. But, of course, Brian was the man over at the whole Pod Saves America, Pod Saves the World company. And he was there for several years from the beginning, I believe. Just recently left to start Off Message. And it's so good. And I like to think our conversation about his recent work is, too. And if you want to jump to that, you can now. It starts at about 21 minutes after my longer than I thought it would be news segment. Just headlines today because it's already 4:45 in the morning when I'm recording this, and I want to get it up by 6 a.m. Every once in a while, maybe once a week, sometimes less, every once in a while, 2 times a week, I will actually realize around 7 or 8 that I've had a rough day or a long day, usually just a lot of work, and so I'm tired and I don't have the kind of energy required to produce the show. So I'll recognize that usually around 7 or 8 because it takes a lot of energy and I have to be rested to do this. I usually take a nap on those days, but yesterday was busy and awesome, but it meant I didn't get that nap and have enough energy to produce an entire show at 7 or 8 p.m., which usually takes 3 to 5 hours sometimes. But anyway, I just thought that was a little housekeeping note that some of you might be interested in or want to know, because I'm not sure how many of you press play on the show right when I post it at midnight, or it gets posted at midnight automatically, and listen to it through the night because either you're an over-the-road truck driver or you can't sleep or whatever reason you're up and listening to podcasts mine at that time. But sometimes it won't get up by midnight. But if that's the case, it means the next deadline is 6 a.m. Sometimes I blow right through that, but rarely. So hopefully I'll get it up by then. And I hope that wasn't too boring, because these headlines sure aren't. Sorry. I mean, I'm just thinking about how many fights they were in Congress yesterday. You had the senator from Oklahoma, Mark Mulwayne, or whatever the hell his weird-ass Oklahoma name is. He's a former MMA fighter, I guess, and he's a real son of a bitch and a tough guy prick. One of these guys who says, yeah, this is how we raise them in Oklahoma. We fight each other all the time. And anyway, you all know about this, that he tried to fight the boss of the Teamsters, who himself is seemingly from that school of thought. And then Kevin McCarthy apparently elbowed a weak-kidneyed congressman who voted against him for speaker, or voted to recall him, I think. Congressman Tim Burchett, I think is his name. And he went chasing after Kevin McCarthy. And so it's getting ugly. I mean, it was already ugly, but now it's Republicans fighting each other and witnesses in the Senate hearing. But luckily, at least in the Senate, Bernie Sanders was there to calm it all down.
Pretends like he's self-made. What a clown. Fraud. Always has been, always will be. Quit the tough guy act in these Senate hearings. You know where to find me. Any place, any time, cowboy. Sir, this is a time, this is a place. If you want to run your mouth, we can be 2 consenting adults. We can finish it here.
Okay, that's fine. Perfect.
You want to do it now?
I'd love to do it right now.
Well, stand your butt up then.
You stand your butt up.
Oh, hold on.
Big
Oh,
guy.
stop it.
Is that your solution every
Hold it. No, sit down. Sit down.
Okay.
You know, you're a United States Senator. Sit down.
Active.
Oh, okay.
Sit down, please.
All right.
Can I respond? Mr.
Hold
Chairman?
it. Hold it. If
Hold
we
on.
can,
This
no,
is
I have
what
the
he
mic.
said.
I'm sorry.
This is
Hold
what
it.
he said.
You'll have your time.
Okay.
Can I respond?
Oh, no, you can't. This is a hearing. And God knows the American people have enough of contempt for Congress. Let's not
I don't
make
like
it worse.
thugs and bullies. And that's what-
I don't like you because you
Hold
just
it.
described yourself.
Hold it. You have the mic.
Yeah.
You have time.
All right.
Make your statement.
Oh, in the end, Mark Wayne Mullen, I feel, looked really embarrassingly cringy weak. Like he tried to come off as this manly, strong, bully guy, fighter who actually fights his battles. But in the end, old Bernie Sanders sat him down. He's like, okay, fine, I won't fight the witness. I still think Bernie Sanders could have handled that more and could have embarrassed him more, and along the lines of, you are a United States Senator, sit down. In all of my years, I've never seen anybody try to physically fight a witness. I've been here for 7,000 years, but look at the physical distance between you and the witness. Nobody thinks you were making up that ground before somebody got between you. Sit down, for goodness sake. Who made you? You're a child. You know, it's always easy to criticize after the fact, but it's also why I think, frankly, and I'm sorry to sound so virtuous, but it would be great if the chairman was a woman. Somehow I think she would have handled that differently, or it would have been probably even better if it was mostly women and all of those microphones right there, because I'm guessing that wouldn't happen. Might sound like a weird thing to insert, but when we think about different types of leaders, I often think about that when men get that way, which I've gotten way more times than I want to admit, but I'm also not a U.S. senator. And one more comment, if you don't mind, from me. I don't love when people, again, often men, talk about, I'm self-made. I don't like that. I mean, I understand where people are coming from, and I get feeling proud of your accomplishments and your hard work, despite all of the challenges, despite where you started out, some rags to riches story. I don't like it as much, again, sounding virtuous, but when a white guy does it, because I think we have generally had more opportunities, and really opportunity is more important than anything else. Secondarily, of course, what you do with it, and that matters, not taking away anybody's accomplishments. But as a guy who began his career as a stand-up comedian and ended up working in corporate media on TV and radio, talking to all the people I do, I probably could make the case that I'm, quote, self-made, but I would never do that. It would feel super weird to do that because so many amazing people have supported me along the way, provided me with opportunities, opened doors. Yeah, a lot of people were dicks, stood in the way, put knives in my back and so on. It wasn't easy, this and that, it was hard, but self-made? I don't know. What about all the institutions and businesses and comedy clubs and platforms and all of the things that were there for me to go take advantage of? We are in this together. That's my point. People aren't self-made. There are other people that are helping. He mentions his wife. I'm sure there are plenty of people that helped Mark Wayne Mullen build whatever business he had. Okay, I'll step down off the soapbox. I don't like to rant too much, but I would love to get your thoughts, what you hear when you hear someone say self-made, or if you say that, if you use that or phrase or identify with that ideology, that theory that I built this myself. Remember when that was a thing between Mitt Romney and President Obama, I believe, on the campaign when they were going against each other, I think. It feels like a very kind of conservative Republican individual ideology. But if you hear something different when you hear that phrase or you use it, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Email me or comment somewhere, maybe at the Hangout. standupwithpete@gmail.com. All right, let's get to those headlines, the important ones at least. Probably the most important domestic headline, the most relevant one, is that yesterday, more than 200 House Democrats voted to support a plan backed by the new speaker, Mike, the evangelical MAGA accountability app Johnson, the right-wing speaker, to avert an impending government shutdown. The legislation was opposed by many Republicans. It passed, clearing the two-thirds threshold required. If it's signed into law, it will keep the government funded into early 2024. New York Times says Mike Johnson's unusual approach was a gamble and that it relied on a substantial number of Democrats to help pass a package that did not include any military aid to Israel or Ukraine. The move proved effective as most Democrats who were satisfied that the legislation did not include budget cuts voted in favor. In the Senate, where legislation heads next, Chuck Schumer, the majority leader, said he wanted to vote as soon as possible. And the alliance that came together reflected a reality that 2 consecutive Republican speakers have now reluctantly embraced. The House Republican Party lacks the political will to keep the government funded, forcing its leaders to rely on Democratic votes to do so. That's New York Times analysis, and I'm going to be asking a lot of people about this and thinking a lot about how Democrats can, if they should, even message on the fact that Republicans, this extreme Republican speaker, has to work with them to simply keep the government open. So that's the big domestic story. Also, a former Trump attorney told Georgia prosecutors that in December 2020, Trump's deputy chief of staff told her the boss didn't plan to leave the White House, quote, under any circumstances, which is what a lot of people were saying at the time and looks like almost played out. Fulton County DA Fani Willis asked for an emergency protective order after portions of videos from key witnesses in her election interference case against Trump leaked. Trump's allies are reportedly pre-screening up to 54,000 pro-Trump loyalists as a type of government in waiting if Trump wins the 2024 election. That sounds ominous. And Speaker Mike Johnson, the guy without a bank account, I just mentioned him. He also endorsed Trump's 2024 presidential bid, saying he's, quote, all in on the twice impeached, disgraced former president who's facing 91 felony charges stemming from 4 indictments. And future Gilead's commander, Mike Johnson, was on CNBC yesterday where he was asked about this by Andrew Ross Sorkin in a long, worth listening to roundup, but I'm not going to include that. And Mike Johnson first responded with this.
How you think about all those things?
Listen, I think when we're voting for president, it can't be about personalities. It's got to be about policies and principles. And if you want...
All right, well, hold on a second. Hold on, Mike Johnson. It can't be about personality. It has to be about policies and principles. Okay, well, what are the principles then of a Donald Trump? And more importantly, when you say personality, what do you mean it doesn't matter or it can't be about? Isn't personality the same as character? I hate when someone says it can't be about personality. It's politics. It's all about personality, whether you like it or not. If someone seems like a fair, decent, smart, responsible, thoughtful person, they're more likely, or should be in the world I want to live in, more likely to win whatever seat they're running for. It does seem that what a lot of folks on the right are looking for are the meanest, most selfish, self-centered pricks you could possibly ever imagine, but I digress. More from Mike Johnson on why he supports Donald Trump still, despite the fact, as Andrew Ross Sorkin points out, he's been indicted on 91 counts.
You're talking about the rule of law, and he's now been indicted, on 40 different charges. There's such a juxtaposition behind the idea of rule of law and then things that he's done that may very well have broken the law. And I recognize that there's elements of it that may be political. I'm not even going to dismiss that, but I'll stipulate with you that there are elements that are probably true that are political, but not all of them.
Listen, I think this is motivated by political prosecutions, and we call it lawfare. That's what it is. It's just another way to go after a candidate. And what's happened to President Trump is unprecedented. And every time a new indictment drops, it follows after some favorable thing that he gets in the poll or in the election or whatever. I mean, everybody can see this with their own 2 eyes. And I think the American people can evaluate that for what it is. You have these district attorneys and you have, the FBI and the DOJ that have been weaponized against their political enemies. I came off of the House Judiciary Committee. I served there. I've been in the hearings. I've questioned Attorney General Garland and Christopher Wray at the FBI. There's a lot of abuses that have been allowed, and we have to reform that. It's one of the things that Congress has to be involved in because we have oversight responsibility. So we're using the power of the purse here. We're using our oversight responsibility. We're going to use every tool in our arsenal to make sure that we change the way Washington works and bring back people's faith in this institution because it's critically important to keep a constitutional republic.
All right. Well, I'm sure you are outraged after hearing that, which is why it might be important to take another deep breath. But I wanted you to hear it because I think that is what a lot of people, obviously, in this country believe. And when we're trying to understand how someone can support Donald Trump after he's been indicted in more than four different courts and jurisdictions and 91 counts, isn't it? Right? It's that they think all of that is political, or as he called it, lawfare. So that helps you understand why many people think that and enjoy arguing with them on that point, because it will be the one they make at Thanksgiving. Maybe just stick to the one investigation where he took all those confidential top secret files and then make them defend that. I guarantee your Trump-loving relative will say, yeah, no, you're right about that. It's a good point. I mean, you shouldn't have done that. But, okay. Pass the taters, Uncle Jim. How about those Jets? Couple of other headlines I want to mention, and I'm going to skip what's happening in Israel, Gaza, because I'm not prepared to talk about that. I didn't follow it yesterday, so I don't want to mention too much about it, other than there is a huge rally where thousands of people showed up in Washington, D.C., and there's some controversy around it because they invited a very controversial hate monger, John Hagee, to talk there. And this is just a horrible person who said, basically, praised Hitler at one point and said a lot of other controversial things that it would seem he should not ever be invited to something that is supportive of Israel, the Jewish people, etc. But yet now he was there. Also, Van Jones spoke, and while he was saying that we should all be peaceful, there was a chant that broke out of the rally that was no ceasefire, which is super upsetting and disturbing. Nonetheless, more than 400 American officials sent a letter protesting President Biden's Israel policies, thousands gathering in Washington, showing their support for Israel. So the juxtaposition of that I did notice yesterday, but other than that, I'm not paying attention to what's happening on the ground in Gaza. There was a promising inflation report yesterday. Price increases in the U.S. slowed last month, more than economists had predicted, according to government data released yesterday. The report provided the Federal Reserve with renewed evidence that its battle against rapid inflation is working. Good job, Fed. Possibly reduce the need for further rate increases. More top news. Prosecutors in Kiev, Ukraine, accused 3 officials of colluding with Russian intelligence when they aided efforts by Rudy Giuliani to tie the Biden family to corruption in Ukraine. And that is a big story that'll probably get covered up, but I'll want to dig more into. Former campaign aide to George Santos, the embattled, controversial, lying, super weird Republican congressman from New York, pled guilty to wire fraud yesterday. Former campaign aide to Santos pleading guilty to wire fraud. Wonder who told him to fraudulently wire stuff. President Vladimir Putin and Putin, I hear you, Vicky, pardoned one of the convicted organizers of the murder of journalist Anna Politkovskaya. I said it right. In return for his service to Ukraine, the man's lawyer said. How about this? The gap in life expectancy here in the U.S. between men and women has grown to its widest in nearly 30 years, driven mainly by men dying of COVID and drug overdoses. And so hopefully with the vaccines, we won't see those types of deaths with COVID, at least temporarily. Maybe it'll be some other virus. But the drug overdoses are continuing. I would argue probably there's data in there without looking at it about suicide as well when it comes to men. But that's a pretty upsetting gap, I would say. Unless, ladies, you don't need a man. That was morbid. Nearly every cherished aspect of American life is now under growing threat from climate change, according to a major report from federal government. Iceland is bracing for a possible volcanic eruption. Is it going to happen or not? It seems like it's really been building. I think we should know by Monday. That's what I say. The U.S. Army overturned the convictions of 110 black soldiers, 19 of whom were executed, who had been convicted of in a 1917 riot, which I thought was also an interesting story. And finally, Threads, the social media app created by Facebook to compete with Twitter, will let users delete their accounts without losing their Instagram profiles, because Facebook, Instagram, and Threads are all the same company and they were connected. So I guess that's a good thing that maybe you might have been trying to do. And now you know. You're welcome. All right, let's get to my first guest. That's all the news I've got for you. Thank you very much for listening to it, because I did put together a quick synopsis for you here in the morning. But I have, like I said, Brian Beutler joining me today, and it's so good. Let's get to it now. But first, a word from longtime listener, friend, subscriber, and stand-up's own announcer, voiceover actor from Northern California, Pico.
Hey there, stand-up listeners. If you think this is the same promo spot you heard previously, you'd be wrong. Because I've slightly rearranged the script for this one to remind you about the benefits of becoming a stand-up Patreon subscriber. For as little as $5 a month, you not only gain access to our member Discord channel, you can join our weekly online hangouts too, where we all happily criticize Pete's terrible fashion decisions. And also, puberty. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic or visit the show's website at standupwithpete.com and click on the big red button that says Support Stand Up.
Thank you very much, Pete Co. As always, appreciate that. And now let's get to Brian Beutler. Very impressive guy, former editor-in-chief over at Crooked Media and a lot of other great roles and jobs in political journalism before that. Really one of the best. He writes about politics, media, culture in America and says he tries to see past the distorting effects of lies, jargon, and talking points that can make these realms so confusing. It's offmessage.net. 20-year career in journalism as a beat reporter, coverage of Congress, policy, politics. He's launched and hosts multiple podcasts, published the country's most prestigious outlets, including the New York Times and more. I love subscribing to offmessage.net, and I really like talking to Brian today. Go check it out. Go subscribe, and also check out his videos and subscribe to his YouTube channel, Decoding the News. Links to all of that in today's show notes. Let's do it right now with Brian Beutler.
Yeah, conned into coming back. My favorite new independent political analyst. He is no longer corporate. I don't know what you were last, but Off Message is up and running, and I'm eating it up. Thank you very much for joining me again.
Oh, it's great to be back.
I just saw the fight. There was almost a fight in the United States Senate between a senator from Oklahoma and a union boss, Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, basically derailed the Senate hearing and challenged the Teamsters president, Sean O'Brien. He seems like a real dick himself, but either way, he stood up and he tried to go after him. And old Senator Sanders, the chairman, was like, "Stop doing that. You're a senator." And my question is, Brian, why wasn't he thrown out of the hearing right away?
Well, I guess the answer is that he's, duly elected senator. And unless they're, for whatever reason, asked to step down from the committees, they're supposed to follow the rules of the committees. But like Bernie Sanders can't ask the Capitol Police to remove another elected senator. But he can gavel him down. And I thought it was interesting that Mark Wayne Mullen, so hot to get into a fight with a union boss, has this rumpled old chairman here, and he listened to the rules, responded to the gavel, dropped the fight. So unfortunately, it's never quite as satisfying when you're talking about members of Congress being dicks on the stage that you imagine that there's some countervailing force can emerge and make them shut up or sit down or get booted from the hearing room. But really, they run the show and they don't answer to anyone like the way you or I might have answered to a boss at one point. So,
all right, well,
we're stuck with them.
I was reactionary, but I just I don't think I've ever seen that in the United States Senate in a hearing, a senator physically standing up and pretending he's going to go fight a guy. But you can't throw him out. You can't do that. You're not allowed to do that.
No, it does seem I feel like over the course of 17, 18 years, however long I've been doing this, I've, occasionally tempers flare and there's, scuttlebutt in the press for a moment about a fight that almost happened or things got really heated or whatever. And it really does seem like in the Trump era, Republicans, even amongst themselves, are puffing their chests and resorting to threats, at least to physical violence, much more frequently than used to be the case. I mean, even we're recording this Tuesday, same day as the Mark Wayne Mullen blow up in the Senate committee. There was an incident on the House side where deposed House Speaker Kevin McCarthy noticed that one of the 8 Republicans who voted him off the island was submitting to an interview, and with his security detail behind him, he went up to that congressman and elbowed him in the back, interrupted the interview, and walked off. And it took the congressman a few seconds to sort of recombobulate himself. And then he ran after Kevin McCarthy like they were going to fight. So,
I did not catch that. Bad coverage by me. Wow.
It all just happened this morning.
Brian, I went out for a run and I missed a fight. It reminds me of high school. Like, I miss the fights every time, but that's crazy. Wow. Okay. Well, that's where we're at, you know?
Yeah.
At least on that side.
Alas.
Yeah, class. Let me talk about something probably more important. You have been doing great work analyzing the media, analyzing politics as always. But a week ago from when we're talking, we had the off-year elections, and you had this great piece, like 24 takeaways, and it was so good. But it was pretty quick, too, hot take. And, you know, people should go read it. And I've mentioned a little bit of it. But a week after that, what else would you add, or what do you want to recap from that you think is most important for listeners, for voters to understand about what happened last week, and you know what anybody's getting wrong? There's a lot of everybody's talking about it, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the big picture takeaways remain the same because it was a fairly one-sided election, right? Democrats won, and even where they didn't win, like in Mississippi, they overperformed what you would expect, and so that creates like a baseline impression that at least in these sort of lower voter turnout off-cycle elections, Democrats are doing well. Like, Democratic voters are fired up. They definitely don't like the Republican candidates who are running, or the Republican issue positions that are up on ballot referenda. But I do think that it's what has become a little bit clearer with a little bit of critical distance since the election is that, you know, as good as the results were in the binary who won, who lost sense, there are like small indications of Democratic weakness. Not so weak that they lost the election, obviously, on last Tuesday, but weak enough that the party should be concerned heading into the general election in 2024, when turnout will be much higher. You know, one of the signal results of the off-year elections was that Democrats reconsolidated control of the Virginia state legislature.
Right.
So they control the assembly and the Senate there. And that's important and good, but they barely won it. And that's a state that Joe Biden won by like 10 points in 2020. And so for Democrats to feel really good about where things are for them heading into the general election next year, I think it's reasonable to say you'd probably want to win those state legislative races by a wider margin. And Dave Weigel, a reporter for Semaphore and a friend of mine, pointed out that even though this year Democrats won and 2 years ago they lost in Virginia, the results on Tuesday look a lot more like that election, the 2021 election, than like the 2020 election, where Biden at the top of the ticket helped Democrats crush the election.
Right.
So that's worth noting, and it's subtle, but it's important because I think that there's just a temptation to ride high when you win. It feels good to win. But in a presidential election, you can actually win the popular vote and lose. And so Democrats, I think, will want to be concerned with widening the margin to reduce the risk that they either lose the 2024 election outright or win the popular vote, but don't walk away with the presidency.
The issue everybody was talking about, of course, women's reproductive rights and how that motivated and animated people. The great feminist leader, comedian Bill Maher, on his show the other night said Joe Biden should just call himself Abortin' Joe and run on that. And I wonder what you think of the issue and where it will still be motivating and animating people this time next year.
Yeah, I don't see any indications in any of the special elections or in Tuesday's off-year elections that the issue has lost any of its galvanizing force. I mean, it's hard to tell because so often these special elections are happening in states where the right to abortion disappeared after Dobbs, or Republicans eliminated the right to abortion after Dobbs. And then there's a referendum and all the voters show up to get their reproductive rights back, and then they win. And if they win, the question becomes, well, are those rights secure? And are the voters who wrested them back from the GOP, are they going to become complacent again the way the whole voting public was kind of complacent about abortion rights before the Dobbs decision? They thought rose the law of the land and these things aren't going anywhere. And so I think that that's kind of an open question. Like, how are voters in Virginia now going to treat the abortion issue? Do they realize that the right to abortion is still under threat? If Republicans sweep the 2024 elections, they can ban it nationally, and suddenly whatever you did in 2023 doesn't really matter.
Right.
However, I think that because it remains a galvanizing issue in states where reproductive rights are known to be under threat, that it does make sense for Joe Biden to figure out ways to make voting for him and Democrats synonymous with restoring Roe v. Wade style protections, and voting for Republicans as voting to ban abortion state by state or nationwide. And one way he could do that, and it's something that I kind of pushed ahead of the 2022 midterms, is you can say, if you reelect me, send me back to the White House and give me 2 more senators and control the House, then we can codify Roe v. Wade nationwide, and that'll be the end of it. And that makes it a really simple calculation for voters who are motivated by reproductive rights as an issue. Yeah, even if I live in California, I got to go. Well, I got to go vote.
Yeah, that's my one more question about that, which is you talk about the states that have either lost women's reproductive rights or they're in danger and threat, and women and voters have fought back in those states as they did last week. But what about my state of New York, where my representative is a Republican named Mike Lawler? Does he get damaged by the fact that the new speaker is Mike Jones, and that this Congress, these House Republicans would like to vote to codify anti-abortion into law, like a federal ban? I mean, doesn't it hurt him? Can we get that seat back because of him being a Republican, regardless of what he says? As a Republican who he's going to have to support Trump, even though he says they're all clowns, he in the end is one of them. What about those blue states that have now Republican or Biden districts that have Republicans in them, like mine?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is going to come down to how ably Democrats contest those seats, right? Like, do they nominate good people? And then do they make Mike Lawler's centrality to the question of how reproductive rights are or are not going to be restored clear to people, right? Because he's going to go out and say, I'm not going to vote for a national ban on abortion, right? But he's going to vote for Mike Johnson to be speaker in 2025.
Right.
And if Mike Johnson is speaker, then it doesn't matter what public opinion is or who controls the Senate or who controls the White House. Roe v. Wade style protections are not going to get a vote in the House. And if you flip it around the other way, you can imagine Trump winning the presidency and Republicans winning the Senate. But if Lawler loses as part of Democrats taking over the House, then at the very least, Democrats can hold the line and say Republicans aren't going to erode reproductive rights any further than they already have. Right. And so either way, everyone who cares about reproductive rights in that district should understand that voting against Mike Lawler is part of either how you get the reproductive rights protected. Yes, it's just whether you can restore reproductive rights or protect them from being eroded further. But that has to be made clear to the voters mostly by the other party.
I will send this clip to Mondaire Jones. Okay, so
I think Mondaire will do a really good job with it for what it's worth. I think he's really talented.
I do too. I've gotten to know him pretty well. He's a great guy and a pretty effective operator, whether it be campaigning or governing, in my opinion. Yesterday, Brian, as you know, the Supreme Court announced a code of ethics. John Roberts put out a code of ethics. I also announced my code of ethics here at Stand Up, and it's similar to theirs in that I can do whatever I want still. What do you think of their code of ethics? What are your thoughts on the new Supreme Court code of ethics?
Yeah, it's kind of like making a pinky promise not to be bad again. I really think that's about it. I mean, I do think that it matters, right? Like it's worth noting that they felt public pressure. They understood that really at the end of the day, the court needs its legitimacy because it doesn't have really like a military or a police force to make the public respect its rulings, right? So it recognized that enough damage had been done to the Supreme Court's credibility by the exposure of all these bribery scandals that the Republican appointed justices are in the middle of, that they thought that they had to do something, like get the word out that we are taking this seriously in some sense. Even when you burrow into the details, it's clear they're not really taking it seriously. They're just trying to get the issue off their back. So I like my main concern isn't so much that, I mean, I never expected the Supreme Court to police itself well or to put out a code of ethics and also some sort of enforcement mechanism to make sure that they hold themselves to their own code. What I'm more worried about is that I think that there are some Democrats in the Senate who really want to wipe their hands of this issue. They don't want to deal with the the messiness of confrontational oversight with Harlan Crow and Leonard Leo, these people at the center of the bribery scandals. And they've been calling for John Roberts to police the Supreme Court himself and leave us in the Senate out of it. And they might see this as an off-ramp for them. Like, oh, Supreme Court introduced their own code of ethics. Now we can drop the issue. I hope that doesn't happen. I don't necessarily think it will. But I do think that one of the intended effects of doing it is, like, in addition to trying to get the public to regain some confidence in the Supreme Court, they want the Senate to back down. And so that's part of why they put this out. You look at it closely and you realize there's no teeth to it. And if the Senate does back down, they can just go right back to accepting all these gifts from all these billionaires, and no one's going to do anything about it.
I feel like you're talking about Dick Durbin and Sheldon Whitehouse, and I don't think Sheldon Whitehouse is going to back down. It feels like this is his main primary mission. And he didn't like his reaction. Sure. Yeah.
No, it's not Whitehouse that I'm worried about.
Yeah. Okay.
But unfortunately, because the Senate's so narrowly divided, that it means that with one exception, a different committee, you need the chairman to want to issue subpoenas, and then you need unanimity among members of the committee to vote to authorize subpoenas. The Democratic members, because Republicans aren't going to vote for subpoenas for like Leonard Leo and Harlan Crow and all these people who bribed Republican appointed justices. So you need every Democratic member of the Senate Judiciary Committee to be on the same page. And if you lose one, if one of them says, well, okay, now we don't need to go so hard, suddenly you can't run the investigation any further. It hits a dead end and it's over. So that's the issue. I don't like, obviously, Sheldon Whitehouse really wants this to happen.
Yeah.
Dick Durbin had to kind of get dragged into it. And then there are other members of the committee whose commitment to seeing the investigation through to the end, I have some questions about.
Fair enough. I do too. You have this really important piece, I feel like. UAW's victory and Joe Biden's curse. The president catches hell easily. His successes often go ignored. The Auto Workers Union prevailed in labor contract negotiations with General Motors, the last of the big three car makers, after a 6-week strike. And then yesterday we got news, I think the Associated Press reporting that some of the other non-union shops like Hyundai and non-union states are quote, right to work for less states, as they call them, I think. These other manufacturers that are non-union, they're now having, obviously, this is how it works, to pay more. But I think your larger point is how this gets reported out, and most importantly, I guess, what the perception of voters is and the American public on President Biden and his administration. First president ever to, walk the line. I guess he was a little hesitant at first, but he was out there with a bullhorn. And this is such a major, major deal, Brian, I think, the UAW contract. And what does it mean? What is the media getting wrong? And why do we get it? So why don't we give credit and think more about a triumph like this one and the ripple effect it has?
So I think let's start with the good news is that because there's a union, the fact that Joe Biden took the side of the union and then the union succeeded means that there's a mechanism for him, or at least his allies in the union leadership, to be clear about what happened, right? Like the president had their back, Donald Trump didn't. And so that makes 10,000 or however many 5 figures, 6 figures numbers of auto workers in the Midwest will know who was on their side and who wasn't. And ultimately that may be the most important thing. But I think that the reason this got garbled was in part because of what you alluded to, like the White House was ambivalent about whether they should send the president onto the picket line. And in that window of internal debate, Donald Trump came out and like bamboozled everyone and pretended like he was like the real, like he had no hesitancy and he was going to go support the workers and he's like the real candidate for the workers. And I don't know why reporters after all these years aren't skeptical of things like that when they come from Donald Trump,
right? But
they kind of bought it. And then it took Joe Biden deciding to walk the picket line and Donald Trump going to a non-union plant for them to realize that they had gotten it wrong. And then it was this like grueling process of trying to get them to correct the record. And I think most of them did by the end, but at that point, a pretty big misimpression had been created. And I think based on news reporting alone, if you ask news consumers, which of the candidates was more on the side of the auto workers, Trump or Biden, the results would be skewed by the fact that the coverage was off, was wrong and had to be corrected. And then it was resolved in the workers' favor, but there was almost no coverage of it because the partisan controversy was over, and there were other more like new stories in the news. The war in the Middle East. There was the New York Times Siena poll showing Joe Biden losing, and so rather than going back and taking a second look at whether Joe Biden did the right thing, did well, won a victory, helped these workers get a big raise, it just kind of got buried. And it's not like there was no reporting on it. It just, it didn't drive any news. It didn't hit the news the way big stories do when they ultimately like change what voters know or what they're talking about. And so, part of it, I guess, falls to the White House and President Biden for not rolling out this big historic thing where he was going to go walk the picket line with a bit more confidence. But from there, the cascade of mistakes was all from professional journalists. Right. And we can't go back like that mistake is made. So fortunately, the union is there to make it clear to the actual workers. But I feel like the public at large should know who helped the workers win their strike and who was actually on the side of the bosses and non-union shops. And even though it's clear to you and me, I don't think it's necessarily clear to the voting public at large.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you've got this great piece about it. Another reason to subscribe to offmessage.net. Finally, your political analysis, Brian, top notch, always has been. But I love your critique and analysis of the media as well. I hope everybody listening will go subscribe. Don't let me down to Brian's YouTube page as well.
And don't let Pete down.
Don't let me down. At Decoding the News. I'll link to it in the show notes. So if you don't remember it, because here you've got this great analysis of media, of the political media especially. But also you've got this piece that a lot of people were sharing and loving yesterday titled Joe Biden is a better dresser than Donald Trump. A bold truth the mainstream media won't tell you. I read the whole thing and I was like, well, this is really well written and specific. And I guess Brian knows a lot about fashion, but I don't understand why he spent the whole issue writing it. And then I go and I see all the smart people, and I thought I had a great sense of humor. And they're like, oh, this is a send up. This is a critique of the media. And, at one point, I think you cited the New York Times on the front page had an article, I guess last week, about that the kids were all wearing blue or something on the front page of the New York Times to court. This was a parody of media. Joe Biden is a better dresser than Donald Trump. It's also a lot of good points, which are also true. But I'm sorry it went above my head on first read. I apologize for being a dumb.
No, I think that's mark a good satire. Like I saw some other readers a little bit confused. Is this earnest or is it satire? And the truth is it's both. I mean, I believe every word I wrote in there. Like Joe Biden is a better dresser than Donald Trump, and no part of it was me saying something that I think isn't true in order to make it funnier or whatever. But just this idea that like what matters in this extremely high stakes election is some question about fashion, and that's what you put on the front page when the scenery for the story is a civil fraud trial where Donald Trump's businesses may get shuttered because of how badly he cheated investors in the government, and everything else about this election that's important. Like what goes on the front page is how stylish the Trumps are or not. And if you're going to make fashion some important part of political news, well, then let's do it the way we do any other issue. Is like, there's only two candidates for president. If you care about fashion and you want to vote for the most fashionable candidate, you should know Joe Biden is a better dresser than Donald Trump. So that was the rationale for having a little bit of fun at the media expense. And honestly, it was the most fun article I've written in a long time. Oh,
good. So. I'm glad, because it was really good. My other weird takeaway was like, man, he really is like, I know you're a good writer. I know you're a smart, funny guy, but like to be so specific about fashion. And I was like, I don't even think Brian Beutler has like got really good fashion himself. Like I've seen the YouTube videos. I've questioned some of the shirts, but
I don't even know what I mean, I feel like when it's time to go to a wedding or an event where I'm going to speak or something like that, you put it together. I try to dress nicely. When I'm unfortunately, when I'm on Zoom or SteamYard or Riverside or Zencaster, sometimes it's Black Hoodie season. Unfortunately,
I do think it's weird that you're wearing a unitard and a sombrero. I wasn't going to say anything, but the audio listeners will get that. Thank you very much for joining me. As always, it's I'm loving reading the new newsletter. I hope everybody subscribes if they haven't already. But it's great to catch up again. Keep up the good work, sir. Thank you.
Really appreciate it, Pete. Thank you.
All right. So good. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, and I really appreciate Brian joining me. It's a big deal. He's got a big following, so it'd be awesome if you went and notified him somehow that you heard him here on Stand Up, whether it be on the app formerly known as Twitter, at his Substack, or anywhere else you can get to him. That would be great, because I want him to keep coming on and think it's valuable for him to join me. His analysis is so good. Go subscribe to offmessage.net right now. Thank you, Brian. Thank you for listening, for supporting, subscribing. Follow me on all the social media apps, platforms. It helps me grow, and I appreciate you growing along with me. Living, learning, laughing here on Stand Up, as we try to do each and every day, sometimes more than that. I've got conversations coming up with Michael Ian Black, who's joining me again. We had a really good one. And Dr. Jason Johnson, who hasn't joined me for far too long, and I had an awesome talk as well. I'm going to get those out. David Rothkopf, and so much more. Folks, that's all I've got for you. Jon Carroll is an Emmy Award. An Emmy Award? I say that. Grammy Award. Maybe someday an Emmy. Grammy Award winning singer-songwriter. We love him. You should support him too. JonCarroll.org. Go buy this song that takes us out each and every day.
You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. Point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up and show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up, got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up, people got the power. Stand up. Come on, 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 come on.